I would like to welcome everyone to our Architects Focus presentation, Passive House Details Applied, organized by New York Passive House and AIA New York. I would like to thank AIA New York for being a partner on this event, and a special thanks to Michael and BAXTINGUI Architects for presenting today and your support of New York Passive House as a sponsor.
Including Amy, who's on the New York Passive House board, who's a principal here, and Will and Frankie and Maggie, and so we and a whole bunch of them are all certified. We were taught by both Ed, John, and Kramer, and it's really helpful. So it's been a group effort. These are some of your learning objectives, which you can just kind of peruse real quick. We'll get to these. And these are all the different people who have helped, although I just told Kevin I was going to take credit for all of his work. Kevin Brennan, who's signed on, is on here, but we've just learned a lot. We're a heavily collaborative office. We work with a lot of different people. We actually collaborate with a lot of other architects. We like collaborating. It's fun. We've had a lot of people in our job sites. And we've really done our best to create a repeatable approach to doing these historic masonry retrofits that can be done anywhere. And so it is not without the people I've listed here, plus people I forgot about who have been really, really helpful. I'm hoping that a bunch of them will be in the chat too. If you got questions that are a little bit more difficult than what I can put together, let me know. But let's start off by talking about why we do Passive House and how we started to do Passive House and how it's changed our office. We started to do a Passive House because we did a project that wasn't a Passive House next to Ken Levinson and Sam McAfee. And I made fun of Sam for like 2 years because he's got barely any air conditioning and this ERV thing that I never heard of and these funny looking windows. And it just wasn't going to work. And it worked really, really well. And it was impressive. And even just being in that job site while they were doing it was just fun. It was impressive. Both of them kind of openly shared stuff. I started to go to conferences, met Julie, met a whole bunch of other people who were already doing passive houses, and we were in. We hired Sam to do a whole bunch of passive houses with us afterwards, and we realized that it just fit really well with our housing type, which is historic masonry retrofits. We do a lot of landmark work. A lot of the work you're going to see here are in houses that are in landmark districts, and it just fits it well. It fits the housing type well, fits the building type well. Our first project was very rocky, and we learned that although some of the details were nice, they weren't ready. They weren't good for prime time. They cost too much. Our contractors hated them. And so it was really on our second and third and fourth project with a lot of the team members here at BAXTINGUI and a bunch of the people who are listed to the right that we started to create this repeatable approach. And it's the one thing I would say is really following a repeatable approach and really paying attention to the steps is just really important. This will give you a sense of the type of project we do. A lot of it's a single family restoration of townhouses. These are two relatively new projects that we've done. One is in a landmark district, one's not. But it gives you just a sense of what we're up to. The house on the right is a colonnade house, which in Brooklyn Heights. Wonderful project, great client. This was done with Jay's Custom. He's the first contractor we worked with that actually did a passive house before. So that was fun. And the interior of this house needed a lot of work. The exterior didn't. So we were able to kind of restore it and still do a passive house kind of on the inside of this. You'll see as you go through, or as we go through, all of the details that we've done in passive houses, they've all been on the inside. I think we just did our first project where we put some exterior insulation on the outside of an addition that already had stucco on it, but everything we do on is on the interior, and you can really not even tell. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think a lot of people already understand kind of this this diagram of how a passive house works. I kind of like describing it in the next couple of slides a little bit better, which is just talking about why we do them at all and how we get clients to choose to do them. And I think this is an incredibly important slide for architects and developers and other people when they start to talk to a client about a passive house. We do not mention passive house. We do not mention energy efficiency. We really talk to them about the benefits of a passive house, that they're comfortable, they're quiet, they're sealed envelope from all bugs and dust, filtered fresh air 24/7, that you've got warm and dry cellars. It minimizes mechanical, so I don't need radiators everywhere, pipes and all the other things that nobody wants. And you've got even temperatures throughout. And people didn't know they can have these things. They didn't know they could have a house in New York City sealed from bugs and dust, or mostly sealed from bugs and dust. They didn't know they could have a house that was that was quiet, where you didn't hear the street noise. They didn't even know they asked the question. So they're not going to ask you the question because they don't know to. They don't know the difference between you and another architect walking into the room. But when you know the difference and you describe to them the difference, all of a sudden they can't live without it. Oh my God, I can have a house without bugs and dust. I want that more than my Sub-Zero. I want that more than this. And what's interesting is that's the air sealing component, which is probably the most expensive part about Passive House. So just getting the expenses out of the way, we do high-end single-family houses. We do some more affordable ones as well, but we do 1- and 2-family houses. We're doing a multifamily now. That's a Building of Excellence NYSERDA award winner, which is going to be fun. We'll definitely be presenting on that, where Amy's running that one as well, where it's a 4-family above a community facility in an old firehouse. But for the most part, we do a lot of single families. We were already going to be spending a lot of money on mechanicals. We were already going to be doing a really nice boiler. We were already it was going to have manifolds for multiple zones of heating. We were going to have multiple thermostats that had to talk to each other somehow. We were going to have to do a new flue. But I don't need all that. I don't need the radiators. I don't really need in-floor heating, although we still put it in because people like warm floors. We'll do the electric heat mat. There's a lot of money to be saved on the types of projects we do that help to pay for Passive House. So we really can start to focus on the benefits, which is like the design freedom. So in this picture, you're not seeing any real ductwork. You're seeing some grills in that location, but I've got doors on both sides of this and a big back door without any radiators or other incumbent items, which is really helpful. And then we can talk to people about just the interesting pieces of Passive House, like what if you don't need heat, which I kind of feel like is a game changer that's just still not mentioned enough. I used my heat in my house 7 nights last winter, total. And it doesn't really have to do with anything about how cold it is. It's how much sun did I get the day before. Was it cloudy for a while? And this is a real thermostat in a house that we've done where it's 71 degrees inside, and the real feel outside is 18 degrees. So you can have these houses and you can really coast through in terms of resilience. You just coast through whatever's happening outside. I mean, it doesn't matter to me if everything goes down because I didn't need heat to begin with. You definitely need cooling, and we'll talk about that later. And then this is what I really focus on with clients. And honestly, they never get past the bugs and dust. When I start to describe what's on the left here, and you see the open joists, and you can see the openings that most joists have. There's nothing wrong with this wall. It's structurally sound. It's fine. I don't need to close those up. I mean, you might want to for fire rating reasons, but I don't necessarily need to. But with the Passive House, I'm going well beyond what I would do with fire rating. We're treating those joists, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail. These are existing joists. We don't have to rip things out. We can keep existing stuff. Then we talk about filtered fresh air. And again, people love it. They didn't know they could have filtered fresh air in a house. They're not going to ask you the question because they didn't know they can have it. But once they do know they can have it, it just comes up later over and over and over again. Like, how do I get that? The fact that you can have really quiet houses with no street noise. And you're just kind of coming back to my initial points. And the fact that a lot of people really do want a net zero house. People are really starting to understand what a net zero house is. And so when they start to ask you that, especially with a townhouse like the ones we're doing, with not a lot of roof area, but even ones that are out, in the suburbs, if you're not doing Passive House or close to it, you're not getting net zero. It's just too difficult. Passive House is the path, the net zero, and people really truly understand that you've got to really deal with the house before you deal with anything else. Again, we do a lot of retrofits. This is another Passive House in Brooklyn. We deal with a lot of challenges because although our clients are excited about Passive Houses, they really want what they want. And you can have what you want. You just have to design it correctly. It depends on whether your glass is facing south or north. You can design your glass a certain way. You now know how to shade it and to create interesting elements with the shading so that can still work. We have learned some really good door companies. This one happens to be from Zola, where we've kept the existing surrounds around the door. We've inserted the new Passive House door between them, and we've gotten a really great air seal with that, really tight install. This was M2 Contracting. I don't think he was excited about this. I mean, the tolerances were crazy, crazy tight, but we didn't want to lose any inches inside, so it made for a challenging install. And then we deal with a lot of houses that we don't gut. So this comes up all the time for us. Well, what if I'm not gutting it? What if I can't do a passive house? Well, two things. One, I think you have to work with a passive house consultant or somebody who can model it, because if you're not going all the way, you should make sure that you're dealing with your house correctly. And we had a passive house consultant on this job, and it was really helpful. And we brought the heating and cooling down in this building by over 50%. And what you're looking at here is you're looking at the existing detail that was already gorgeous in this house that nobody would have ever ripped out. And then I think Kevin helped us find this really great foam insulation that we were able to the pump in here. I forgot what that is, but it's really nice, and it can be put into like an inch. And then these are Zola doors that have been made to perfectly match the profile of the old doors. They're just a little thicker front to back. And Landmarks was able to approve that. Same project, other details. We have a skylight above that. That's a really great passive house skylight. In this case, it was a skylight from New Jersey, but now we're able to use Lamilux, which is a lot easier. We are able to restore the leaded glass, put this below. These are just passive house. We didn't have to do anything crazy with those because you can't see them from the street. Just some details as we kind of get into that. Same house. Sorry that I'm spending so much time on one house, but it's a good house to kind of make the points. Again, nobody would let us rip this out. I mean, it'd be crazy to rip it out, whether it's your style or not is another story, but it's historic. We simply took out the failing leaded glass, had it restored. These again are simple tilt turn windows. Zola provided these as well. They did the whole project, and we then reinserted the leaded glass panels in the interior in that thick space that you've got with these passive house windows. It's really, really helpful. This is Mark from our office. He's another project manager and who's also passive certified. So just a little bit more detail on these like incredible pieces of leaded glass. So you can get pretty far in these historic buildings, even if you can't get the passive. And this one didn't, but it got really close. We do a lot of work in houses that have great detail, where we are able to keep a lot of that detail, working with contractors who can really get that going. We'll talk about contractors in a second, it's important. We do a lot of sketching on site. We spend a lot of time on site. I would say our office is set up so we spend probably 40% of our fee as construction services. There's a lot of stuff in retrofits that changes on the job. You've got to be there for the contractor. We like to meet weekly. That has nothing to do with passive house. But again, talking a little bit about how passive house has changed the office. We're doing pre-meetings with these guys, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And we're just going through these details, and we're going through these kind of air sealing details, as well as how we want to insulate them. And we're doing it on site, and a lot of the details are tricky, and just really being there and being able to support the contractors. And right now we're doing a lot of work with John, Ed, and Kramer, and Kevin, and they're all able to really be there for them as well, which is really helpful. So just to get into the details a little bit, hopefully this isn't too small. This is the top of the house this is where the parapet was. Existing cornice is to remain. We put in a little bit of a drainage area here. This is a dormer with our insulation. This is our new parapet for our roof, exterior insulation. The dormers themselves are not massively great performers. They're not horrible performers. With Landmarks, sometimes you can only do so much in terms of thickness. But what you can do is work with your passive house consultant and really make sure that you're making up for it in other areas. Dealing with the exterior joists is something I'm just so happy to have dealt with or just learned about, and just learning that in these houses, pulling them off the front walls is really, really important. So what you're looking at here are some pictures of how we've done it in the past, where we've got our 3/8 wall. We simply pull that front joist off. We've got some rigid insulation in this case with some blocking. This picture is taken before they sold structural foam, so now we can just do that instead. But it breaks the thermal. It breaks the thermal break, or it has the thermal break, or creates the thermal break that allows the cold not to go in. So for people who are new to it, I've got my masonry wall. I've got my joist right up against it. It's how we've all been taught to do it. We tie it in. Well, the cold is coming in. It's coming right through that wall. right through that joist, right through your subfloor, right into the next joist, you're actually cooling off all your interior building materials. The radiator that you have there, probably 30% of its work, 40% of its work is just continuously heating those building materials. And that's why you get those really funny pictures from the outside when people do this therm images from the outside where you can see the radiators right through the walls. They're literally heating that wall. So the simple move of really dealing with these thermal breaks, it's key. And one of kind of the more fun projects we've been on, this is the house that we did the walkthrough on a couple of days ago, and that'll be live on the accelerator soon. And I kind of wish I had these photos for that, but I forgot they existed. This is the underside of a historic stair. In this house, we did not rip out the stair. We did not rip out some of the plaster crown or some of the paneling, and we air sealed around it. This is some Viscon. There's some rapid seal under there from Stowe. But one of the wonderful things I'll talk about now are all the companies who make these liquid applied air barriers. They've all made it cheaper. What's great about passive right this second, and I think it's going to continue, it's like the LED bulb, the rapid engineering possibilities that are happening in all the companies that are jumping into the market and really working with people. And it's been really helpful. When we first started, there were just a handful. You kind of had to deal with all the kind of funny things that come on when that happens. But now there's competing companies. So you get to see we're kind of sneaking in the ERV here. We're visconing the entire bottom part of the stair with air sealing tape and so forth. It probably isn't perfect, but it really helps. This is a before picture of that same house where we kept the crown. Gives you a sense of why we would keep the crown. Now, a couple of things. This crown actually really was falling off. You can see the gap here, but what you can't see are all the cracks that are in the ceiling here. We would have had to restore this crown to some degree anyway. One of the things we realized in these old houses, the cracks very often, the crowns very often are having issues. Very often these plaster ceilings are already delaminating a little bit. So we're used to dealing with that. So in this case, the contractor was able to really, we picked a contractor in this particular case, and a bunch of our contractors fit this profile, where he was a really great carpenter. It's Andrew Fishman from SMR, and really great contractor. He's able to really take care of this crown well. We do take care of the bricks as well. This is hopefully the last time anybody's going to see those bricks for a long time. So if we don't repoint what we have to repoint and deal with them now, it's kind of an issue. You also have to be really careful about the moisture coming through these bricks and really take a look at how they're going to act and really be honest with yourself about how that's going to work. Just some more details about how we were able to do that. We actually, I don't think it's another photo of it. Hang on, I'm going to go forward and then back. Nope, there's not. So we actually put plywood in between every joist. And that helped us to reapply this, but it also helped us to air seal. And you can start to see kind of that tape on the bottom and the top. And that helped us to air seal around the crown. And we actually used the plaster of the crown as the air seal. You can also start to see just some of our details, which I think I've got later on, but if I do, I'll zoom past them there. This is a window that has been not treated yet. Now, a couple of things. We've been for a little while now treating our exterior walls with something to help a moisture open element to make sure that, or vapor open, to make sure that they work well. And Kevin, John, and Kramer are probably on the chat can talk to you more about that and why. But what we also do is we've got these details for the windows where we build the plywood box. We have our studs, which are pulled off the wall by about 1 inch. And that lets, and then this plywood is also pulled off this opening by about 1 inch. And it lets the installation completely and cleanly wrap. Now, sometimes we'll put some blocking in if the window's really tall, but sometimes you don't even have to do that. Sometimes you're getting a strong enough outcome out of just that. We can really, there's a lot of thermal bridges along that window. So you get to see that. This is when the Intello has been installed. We've got the windows installed. One of the other massive benefits for me where with passive is the passive windows don't rack. If anybody's done like a typical window, you've got these windows that rack. They're kind of annoying to install. And all of a sudden, I've got to get those windows in right away. We didn't put these windows in until recently. Once you've got that plywood box in my house, we had the room sheetrocked and the floor in and the ceiling in before we ever had those windows. They take a while to get. And in my house, we didn't order them on time because it was my house and I was late. But what's nice is you have that flexibility with the passive house. Put some rigid insulation in there, and you're fine. Just to talk about that and the whole no heat thing, my house in the middle of the winter with just rigid insulation, not fully taped around, we did not have temporary heaters in my house. It was so hot that they would wear shorts all winter. So it's again the idea that you could do these houses and really just kind of forget about heat is or don't need that much heat is helpful. Got some Rockwell insulation. We put it in a certain distance away from the walls. These are 2 different exposures, but we also do it for soundproofing reasons. A little bit more detail work. You get to see where they're blowing in the cellulose right here. This is a fully installed front joist, the way I was describing it before. A little bit more kind of detail work. It's having a contractor who's willing to kind of also and having some real direction. That's taking the time to think about where these pieces of Intello have to be before they put this header in. This is on the sidewall, and we tried to do enough headers where we weren't always pocketing it everywhere. I mean, sometimes you have to, but it is what it is. A little bit more work on that stair. I think this is a repeat photo. Some more details. This is that stair. Right now, actually, I don't have it in this presentation, but this is all curved, really great looking plaster. Just it's nice and clean and smooth. But you can see the rapid seal and the Viscon right here. Importance of feedback and our systematic approach. And I'll go through this quickly as well. Educating the client on passive house when you first meet with them, kind of getting them hooked is huge. We involve our passive house consultants during schematic design. What's nice about that is we don't draw designs that don't work when we then think about passive house. Going backwards in passive house, and this will be a theme on this next part of the presentation, is what makes passive house expensive. Making mistakes is what makes passive house expensive. Not doing a blower door test early so you can find your stuff before you cover things up is what makes passive house expensive. So really having a repeatable checklist approach, like a dumbed down approach, is really helpful. But for us, which is something that we only really started doing in the last couple of years, because you'll learn by making mistakes, is we've been including our passive house consultants during schematic design. And again, that means you don't have a client fall in love with a design that doesn't work. And all of a sudden, I've got to do this for passive house. Well, if that's the case, they're going to dump passive house. Well, we'll just do passive light, or but it's just helpful. It really does work. And then selecting a contractor as early as possible and really getting them in the team. I think passive house is great for the design build world. I am not a design build fan for our office and our approach, but we work with our contractors like a design build team. We like doing work with them. We have people talking about that kind of that air barrier. You saw Intello. Sega's got a great product. We also use AC plywood. There's a lot of our contractors who will not use the intelligent membranes. They want the plywood. It's definitely more expensive. They don't care. They know how to use it. They know what they're doing. And we don't really tell contractors how they have to do it. We'll vet them and work with them, but working with them early means that the project's there as well, and you save a lot of money and a lot of time. And then we'll get into openly sharing with the community in a bit. I think I've got some slides on that. So selecting the right team. I've got case 1 and case 2, and I'll talk about these quick because I could go on forever. Case 1 is a developer. They need to keep the profit margins tight. You have to try to work with a contractor who has subcontractors who work with them and they're not bidding out to the lowest bidder. If that project wants to go well, you have to have your details already set. You have to have a team who kind of understands those details a little bit at least, but they have to have control over their whole team. It cannot be the type of contractor who's more of a construction manager who's not going to put it to their best guys. It cannot be the low bid. It won't go well. It never will. It's just too difficult. It's got to be a team from the beginning that works. At some point in our lives, everybody will know how to do it, but it's got to be just the right crew. And then case 2 is where you've got a homeowner. It's not a developer. And this is where it's kind of fun, and this is our sweet spot. It's not that you can't do this with a larger project or with a developer, but when we start to talk about contractors and who we use, the contractor for the project that I've been talking about for a long time, as well as the one who did my house, this was their first passive house. They never did one before. They never heard of it before, or they'd heard of it through us. Kevin Brennan taught a course with some of them when he was at AEA. And afterwards, I think he's done it for 475. He's done it for BEX, and he's done it for a few of the others. So we have a nice crew here of people who can teach the contractors. And once they learn, if you're a great carpenter, you're set. You'll get passive house like that. And in the last house we worked in, that contractor did all the air sealing himself. He did not have a sub. And it was nice. Now, the passive house consultant went to their job often, but really getting the right team is important. But for me, the other really important piece is you don't need a contractor who's done it before. You just need a good contractor who enjoys building. Talked about the sequence of design and bringing the people in early. This will show you some of the stuff that building type has done for us, where pretty early on, we're looking at these models that they're creating this presentation for. The client understands why we're making some of the design decisions, why some windows are this size and some windows are that size, why we're doing shading here but not there. They know it at the beginning of design, and honestly, they get kind of into it. It's kind of fun. And then the importance of weekly meetings. I keep this slide in a lot of presentations I do, just because for me it is like a secret sauce item, and it has nothing to do with passive house. I can only screw up so much if I have a weekly meeting. 1 week, and then I got to get my act together. Same with the contractor and everybody else, including the client. If the client hasn't made their decision, they're going to make it by the next meeting. You keep track of them. It's just really, really helpful. And then it keeps all the participants actively participating. Again, it comes back to that really, really good team. And then this is Kevin Brennan himself doing a blower door test. It's doing the blower door test early. In the projects that we've had problems, it's when we didn't do it early enough. You don't need all the windows in. In this case, they were in, but you can tape them off. You do what you got to do. But before you start putting those studs up along these walls where you can't see behind that stud and you don't know where it is, just do them early. And if you can, do them often. It's not so difficult to do a blower door test. If you've got your consultant and he has a blower door, or we've had some contractors who bought a blower door, just use it as a tool. It doesn't really matter about the number as you're putting things in. So for example, one of our contractors who I think flies through passive houses has a blower door just sitting there when he's installing the windows. And at the end of the day, he just turns it on. And he knows if it goes down, okay, one of the windows I did on the 3rd floor is off. It's less needles in the haystack, and again, keeps the cost of passive house down because you're not going backwards. And if you are, you just have to fix that one item. So the blower door is really important. So these are just some of the contractor walkthroughs we do. And this is kind of one of my big things. It's one of the reasons we did the accelerator. We like to share information. All the contractors we work with have agreed to meet together. This is, I think, 10 or 12 different contracting teams, a couple of different passive house consultants, another architect that we compete with was at this one. I think their potential client also came in. And these are contractors sharing with us what's working, what's not. They love to pick on us and pick on our details, which is great because then we can fix our details. And we've been doing this for a long time. It has rapidly increased our knowledge because they know more than we know sometimes because they're actually doing it and we're drawing it. And it has made passive house much faster, much cheaper, but also it's excited them. We've had contractors that we work with who said they weren't interested in doing passive house, do passive house, and get certified just so they can show up to these meetings. Because if you're not doing a passive house, you have to have some skin in the game to show up. There are 3 new contractors in here who are about to do a passive house with us. And again, having them learn from a contractor versus us, it's just huge. This is a student meeting. We're lucky in New York, you've got a whole bunch of different schools that are teaching passive house. I think this was CUNY, if I'm mistaken, but I could be wrong. We've done it for a few. And this is a meeting that we have with students. We like to share again with students and other people. Starting people early is important. And then the other reason to show this is just to talk a little bit more about detailing. This is a Lamelux skylight. It's been really great to have. We put it in a lot of projects. It's clean, it's easy, it drops in, we're done. You can see the Intello used at the skylight opening, really because we didn't want to lose an inch with the plywood. This particular plywood contractor likes Intello on the walls, but plywood on the ceiling because he didn't like the billowing down of the Intello. Again, going through the contractor right before he's about to swing a hammer, but after he's been hired, going through your exterior diagram of how he wants to handle or she wants to handle those exterior details, that whole envelope is important because then you hear it from their mouths how they'd like to do it. And there's no surprises on site. Again, makes building cheaper, not all about passive house. A lot of this just applies to everything. These are some fun doors. These are Zola as well. And that's a view of Manhattan behind. That's kind of fun. So just to finish off with some completed projects. This is a fun project where this was Amy's project where we had this historic bay. This is in a landmark district. It did go to public hearing. We added the bay below to kind of have it be a two-story space in the interior. This is the house on the right is a building where we added that addition. It's a brick rear, again, historic. Amy ran this one as well. The house on the left is a developer project, and this is one that's kind of fun to talk about. We've done a bunch of developer projects. You have to start to ask yourself, why would a developer really go to the lengths of going to a passive house? And the reason is this is in a pretty heavily, pretty competitive market on the Upper West Side. And at the time that this house is rental. At the time that this house went for rent, there were other houses that are similar. And as you can imagine, people who are at a price point where they're looking at this, they want it to be a great house. And all you got to do is close the front door, and you kind of know you're in a different house. You feel it, you can hear it. The door feels good, and you walk through, and you can tell the difference. It's a lot of fun. And then this is a house on the left where we restored the entire facade. But you walk past a lot of these houses, and you wouldn't necessarily know they're a passive house. I've shown some of these already. Just some more examples. Upper West Side project. I think I've talked about this one a little bit more. Large staircase on the inside. Love to do these rooms. I don't think I could have done this amount of glass in a room with just the supply and return right here without these being passive house. Monster performing products with a couch like right there. We like to do things with solar where they actually help to shade some of the solar gain, which is kind of helpful. This is in a landmark district. This passive house has an elevator in it. The mechanical is one unit, and it lives behind here. And that's the other thing in New York City that's really fun. With passive house, I have no mechanicals, so I get my roof back. It's really helpful. Another big roof deck where I got my roof back, which was nice. That same Upper West Side house. I hope that was informative. But if you've got questions, let us know. And thanks for listening to me for the last 40 minutes.
One question: is your majority of France renovation, is that passive house, or do you do kind of a regular retrofit as well? And what do you do if the client doesn't want to, necessarily do a high performance building?
Well, there are some details. So most of them are passive, and most of it just makes sense. But let's assume that we have a client who's just either not interested in certifying or isn't interested in going the whole way. We really only have one cellar detail. Like now that I know that we can do a stego wrap on the cellar and put some insulation below a slab, and I've got a warm, dry cellar that feels good. I mean, when I describe that to a client, they're never going to say no. When we realize that we can put insulation, 4 inches of rigid insulation or more above the roof joists on the roof, and all of a sudden the sun never makes it in, the client never says no to these things. And with the windows, when I keep the street noise out by using a passive house window versus the non-passive house window, and I can tape it in so it's really sealed from the elements, and I could do it for around the same price as the typical window. These are things so a lot of our clients, even when they've kind of backed off it, will come right back to it. But I would say more than not now, we've done enough where people can go into the houses we've done them, and they just want a passive house. Whether they're going to certify it is another story. And then coming back to certification, because it comes up a lot for us. Even if you're not going to certify, you have to go almost as far as if you did certify. Yeah, it's great to have a passive house consultant because they're testing things and you're checking to make sure you got things right, making sure you know where your moisture level wants to be, which is really important. And then finally, you have to test these houses at the end to make sure they're performing well. So kind of when you're done, because you'll want to do that as a client because you want to make sure your house is doing what it's supposed to do. It's really just the payment for certification. I mean, you're going to do so much of this already that the certification also helps. So we're getting a lot of people who will say yes. And then I would say in the last year, we have a lot of people coming to us wanting a passive house, which is a new thing, which I'm happy about.
Yeah, that's a good tendency, I think. Yeah.
Well, there's a few questions that are kind of breaking down along 2 lines. One is, of course, the technical information, like how did you get the foam behind those wooden panels? And that was one. And then another was like, what was the foam for the ledger? What did you like? I mean, basically that looked like a standard
That was pretty,
XDS.
yeah, that was pretty standard. And if
But
Kevin, if you want to unmute for some of these, go for it, bud. But Kevin's on and actually saved us on that house with that wood paneling and helped us find that really cool product and installed it. So if Kevin Brennan's on, he can talk about that.
yeah, because blowing foam in is scary in historic renovations. If you got to have the right foam, so Kevin, what did you guys do? How did you do that?
I can answer the Lamelux skylight thing. So we've done lots of different Lamelux skylights. We've done just their more typical skylight, 4x5 or 5x6, and we have installed, the contractors installed those. We've done massive Lamelux skylights, like I don't know how big they are, but big, multi-pane. I think one was 12 by 15. That should be done by someone with Lamelux, and they've flown someone here to help us with that. So that's been really helpful. So two different animals. One comes with the glass and one doesn't. So
one of the comments from Ben Brown was like, he'd be interested in seeing passive house projects on standard houses that the majority of the population can afford instead of these multi-million-dollar budgets. But
well, that's a good point though. So you're seeing a presentation showing the type of projects that our office does right now. But there are architects, and I'd be happy if you wanted to somehow email us or do it through the accelerator, because some of the projects are on the accelerator. If you look on the projects, there are people doing this in less expensive houses all throughout the country. And I would say my point on kind of the wealthy getting this and so forth, I don't know that I could afford to learn everything that I'm learning without learning it on these projects. And I think the goal now is to spread it wide so that everybody does it on all their projects. And but there are definitely architects that just not this presentation, not these particular products. In fact, we're doing some products that are less expensive. It's just they're not in this presentation. But there are definitely other architects who only do less expensive products, and they're doing passive house.
And we see a lot of the passive house concept applied to affordable housing. So there's a big movement for affordable passive house buildings, and cost is always a difficult animal to navigate. But our expenses, it does not add too much extra cost if you have a team who really has experience with it. I think that's key.
That's true. That's true.
The 3% additional cost for the passive house on mostly new construction, but probably also renovations are seeing that same thing now as people get more attuned to it.
I think so. Yeah. So I would say that and I see that Kevin's off mute, so we'll talk about insulation in a second. But I would say that the 3 to 5% is a real it's a real cost. And I think a little bit more than that is I think it's a little bit more time. It's 2 or 3 weeks more time on the products we're doing. But the point I would make, the larger the house you're doing, and we can all in the chat box go bananas about whether people should have large houses or not, and that's something nobody's solving in the next 5 years. But what we can solve is anybody who's doing a really large house or a high-end single-family house, it's cheaper. I'm not buying all the mechanicals that I would have bought for that house. I'm not buying all the things I would have done for that house. And the only reasons those clients are not doing passive and doing houses that could be off-grid if they want it to be, and doing a house that could be net zero, whether we agree with the size of their house or not, is because they didn't know passive existed. If they did, they would. If they knew the amenities were there, they'd want them.
Yeah, so in that situation at the behind the paneling, the best option was to pour in place a channel fill foam. It's a handy foam product. So because they weren't taking it down, they were able to draw little 1/2-inch holes and then pour the foam in and watch it rise out. So that was the best solution in that situation. The foam there it's a vapor closed, high density, it's a 2-pound foam. So you're taking away a surface that may develop condensation if the foam is not there. It's not ideal in that it's not vapor open, but it's a good solution for a complex problem.
So absent mechanicals, that one particular project that you showed, where do you end up putting your outdoor units in general?
So we very often will put them on the roof. I mean, actually, the Mitsubishis, I know there's other companies who make them, but these heat pump units, we've done a lot of Mitsubishi. We just got used to them. I mean, they're so quiet. You can put them in the backyard and kind of put them behind a bush somewhere. But we've done them on the roof. We've hung them off the parapet of the roof. Their hangers are great, really easy to work with. But it's one single unit on the roof, maybe two tops. And they're small, and you literally you can hear the window unit across the yard more than you can hear the one that's next to you. Hey, Kevin, one of the other questions that came up was, what is the name of the structural foam that I always talk about that I never remember the name of?
It's, I believe it's Armatherm or compact foam. And then
Okay.
there's a few others from General Plastic, but it's Armatherm.
Thanks.
And so you use the foam not just as insulation, but also as the airtight layer.
No, in those instances where they're putting it in the joist, it's just there for thermal break.
Just a break.
At what point do you bring on the contractor? I'm paraphrasing, and how do you actually make that whole early contractor thing work if you're not directly bidding? What is the process with the client in that?
So it can be done. It could be done a number of different ways. But our office in general, just because we tend to work with the same contractors over and over again, we have a bid pool of like maybe 20 contractors now, and we've gotten to know them well. So very often, because we're always wrong on budget, we always want what the client wants. We always want more than we can ever get for the dollar. Very often, we're including our contractors early anyway. Our office does a lot of budget rounds right after schematic design. And it's a somewhat unfair process for the contractor, but you're bringing a contractor in, or 3 or 4 contractors in, and you're asking them, in general, what do you think this costs? And you'd be amazed at how close those numbers are together. And they're not perfect because you don't have everything specified, but what's nice about that is you head into design development and construction drawings in a way where you're doing it to your budget. If you overshot by 300,000 or 200,000 or 30%, like, you didn't pay for a lot. The client isn't in love with something, which is, in my opinion, worse than the money. If they're in love with what you've got and you can't have it, it's a problem. And what's nice about that is then you can continue to include that contractor if you can select one, kind of a handshake, saying, hey, listen, as long as everybody doesn't mess with everybody, job's yours. You can include that contractor through design development and through construction documents, and they can help you with the way they'd like it detailed and the way their mechanical person wants to run it. And maybe they like, Daikin versus Mitsubishi, or, who knows, or this kind of grill, that kind of grill. And what's nice about that process is they're in early, they're helping you to develop the set. As you make decisions that are more expensive or less expensive, they can tell you the difference. And at the end of the day, they're going to provide a solid price with a solid number and sign a contract the same way they would have otherwise. And you have the other 3 or 4 budgets to go back on to make sure they're being honest if you really need it. When we do a typical bid, which is not what I just described, we still bring a contractor in early and help us through. And sometimes you have to pay that contractor to do it, but it's still good to have a contractor involved at the beginning. It's very, very helpful, and it's not a passive thing, actually. I think it's just helpful. I think it saves everybody a lot of headache later on.
Like what we would normally call the architecture until now, where we become much more responsible for being coordinators and making sure that the envelope is tight, but the overall feel, the interior design, do you typically are you also being hired for that, or does the client usually come along with, say, an interior designer or architect to do that, or is it maybe you kind of like the answer is yes?
Yeah, so we are asked all the time to do or just sharing some of the passive stuff, and our details are online already anyway, and we've shared them through the accelerator and through things like this. But so we only take projects where we're involved from the beginning of design until the end of construction. We've stopped taking on projects where we aren't involved during construction because everything changes during construction or gets tweaked during construction. I always describe to people, if you've walked through a beautiful new house and things don't quite line up, they're not quite on, it looks good, but it's like something's off. Those are the jobs without weekly meetings during construction, where everybody fought and there were change orders and nobody knew why or how we got here. Those are jobs without weekly meetings. And it was happening on our projects where we weren't involved on a weekly basis. And it's really it's the secret sauce. So we stopped doing that. We have an interior design firm in-house, and I'd say a lot of New York architects do a lot of interior architecture as well. I mean, there's not a lot of exterior architecture in some of the houses that we do. There's just a lot of it's inside. You know, the image in front of you right now is, if it's still up, is a good example of that. But we also work with a lot of outside interior designers. Again, we're kind of a collaborative office. And then on the passive envelope side, almost everybody in the office now is certified. We do not do our own work. I like being checked by everybody. Right now, we're doing a lot of work with Building Type. We've done a lot of work with Kramer. As I mentioned, we did some work with Sam McAfee. Kevin's done a lot of our jobs, but I like having an outside passive house certified consultant. I think it's helpful.
You do the PHP in-house, or is that then also straight?
Everything's out. Everything's outsourced. We can, but we do everything. Everything's outsourced. Well, the other thing is, and I don't know if John or Ned are on. I'm sure they would say the same, but I'll say it for them in case they're not. They'll have to verify this. I think they'd want to do it all. It's nice that you're either doing it or you're not doing it. You're really checking it or you're not checking it. This way, you know your work is correct, especially in the historic masonry retrofits, where you've got to take your quality of your brick and how much you're pointing it on the outside into consideration, and a lot of other things. It's money as an architect, it's money very well spent having a passive house consultant on board who's checking you and checking the contractor. I'd recommend it to anybody.
Yeah, so if you have those more specific questions, you can go to nypassivehouse.org, and we have a directory for architects, contractors, consultants, and
certifiers.
Yeah, we'll send an email with Michael's contact. You can ask Michael more specific.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really helpful resource, and I think it's good to go on. I think you've got a lot of good people on there. So the Parge code. So is very often, and Kevin, you want to unmute so you can talk about it a little bit more. But it's a lime-based mortar. It's a slurry. It's not thick, and it helps to have some of your liquid applied work well with the brick. But what's cool about some of the new liquid applied area barriers is you may not even need to do that. So Kevin, maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the Parge coat is only 100% necessary when you have really poor brick conditions and you're going to have to repoint everything just to tighten it up structurally. Some of the other applications of the fluid applied air barriers, you can put on a heavier coat and cover them. But the answer is, it kind of depends. The strategy we've used when you're going for a certified passive house is that if the brick is in poor condition and you do a mock-up and you see a lot of where you need to touch up every single one, then a Parge coat sometimes is necessary. So the answer is it depends of what your substrate looks like and how much prep work you're going to need to do. In order to get those fluid applied air barriers to stick on that wall, they has to be clean and dry. So sometimes it's easier to do a Parge coat and then 2 coats of the fluid applied air barrier than it is to do 3-4 coats of the fluid applied air barrier and hit every little pinhole that's in the wall. So sometimes that could be a challenge.
So just a little shout out. So Kevin not only helps a lot of our contractors know how to do passive house because he's taught a lot of them, but he has his own company, Brendan and Brennan. And for a bunch of our contractors, especially some of the new ones going into it, they've just hired Kevin to do it all. Which is nice. Even if, sorry, Kevin, but even if you're going to learn just by watching Kevin, then you can do it next time. Which I know, Kevin, you're probably sure that people do. But it's just nice to bring someone in like Kevin who can do it soup to nuts by himself. Well, not, he doesn't work by himself, but it's just nice to have a crew who can just do it. It's another avenue of doing it if you're just a little concerned about doing it yourself. There are people out there who can do it.
I would like to thank Michael for your presentation. It's always good, I think, to share your experience, your detailing, your struggles as well regarding passive house. At the end, it is a team effort. Thanks, Caleb, for the intro and for Q&A. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.